When a teenage boy protecting his brother faced the most feared gang in town, no one imagined a park would become a battlefield. The autumn sun cast long shadows in the city park as Michael adjusted his backpack strap, checking the time on his cell phone once again. As he did every afternoon, he waited for his younger brother Jordan to leave elementary school, which was a few blocks away. The daily ritual had become an important part of his routine in recent months, since his mother had started working overtime at the veterinary clinic. For Michael, these moments of waiting were a mix of responsibility and contemplation, where he could observe the constant flow of people passing through the park. Sitting on his usual bench near the central fountain, Michael watched a group of children playing in the swing area, their laughter echoing through the square. The familiar sound made him smile, reminding him of when he used to play there with Jordan a few years ago. The gentle wind swayed the leaves of the century-old trees surrounding the park, creating a dance of light and shadow on the paved ground. Michael always chose that specific spot to wait, as from there he could monitor all the paths leading to Jordan's school, ensuring he wouldn't lose sight of his brother. The park had its own rhythm at that time of day. Elderly men played chess at the concrete tables, teenagers passed by with their skateboards, and mothers pushed baby strollers along the winding paths. Michael knew every detail of that place, every peeling bench, every twisted tree, every crack in the pavement. It was a place that conveyed safety and familiarity, where he could let his guard down and simply exist, without the pressures and expectations that the world usually imposed on a 16-year-old teenager. While waiting, Michael mentally organized his schedule for the rest of the day. After taking Jordan home, he would have to finish his chemistry work, prepare dinner for when his mother came home from work, and take a look at the math exercises his brother was having trouble with. It was a lot for a teenager to manage, but Michael had learned to find satisfaction in his organized routine. The sun continued its descent on the horizon, casting golden rays through the treetops, creating a spectacle of light that made that moment even more special. Suddenly, something changed in the park's atmosphere. It was subtle at first, like an out-of-tune note in a familiar song. Michael noticed that some people began to walk more hurriedly, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. The distant sound of approaching engines began to grow, still invisible but unmistakable. What was once an environment of peace and tranquility began to transform into something different, something that awakened his protective instinct. But at that moment, Michael still didn't know that that ordinary afternoon was about to transform into something much more significant. The sound of engines grew gradually, like distant thunder approaching in slow motion. Michael observed how the sound affected the people around him. A mother quickened her pace, pulling her child closer. A group of teenagers gathered their belongings and began to move away. Even the elderly men playing chess paused their game, exchanging worried looks. It was as if an invisible wave of apprehension had spread through the park, transforming the once peaceful environment into something tense and uncertain. Fragments of conversations reached Michael's ears as people hurried past. "It's them again. That snake gang. Better get out of here." The whispers carried a weight of knowledge that Michael didn't fully possess, but that awakened memories of stories circulating at school, reports of intimidation, theft, and gratuitous violence. Looking at the clock again, he calculated that Jordan should appear at any moment, and for the first time that afternoon, he felt a pang of real concern. Across the park, Michael finally spotted Jordan leaving school, his blue backpack easily recognizable even from a distance. His younger brother walked carelessly, probably absorbed in thoughts about homework or the new video game he wanted so much. Michael stood up instinctively, his eyes alternating between Jordan and the surrounding streets, from where the sound of engines now echoed closer, bouncing between buildings like a dark omen of what was to come. Memories began to surface in Michael's mind. Fragments of conversations heard in school hallways, stories about a gang that had begun terrorizing neighboring districts in recent months. They spoke of a leader called Snake, known for his explosive temper and the snake tattoo that serpentined around his neck. The stories always ended the same way, with someone hurt or robbed, and the police arriving too late to do anything. The sun was beginning to hide behind the buildings, casting ever longer shadows across the now almost deserted park. The sound of engines was closer, and Michael could feel the vibration under his feet. His instinct screamed for him to run to Jordan and get him out of there as quickly as possible, but something kept him rooted to the ground, as if his body knew that running would only make things worse. That's when the first engine roars turned the corner, and what Michael saw made his blood freeze. 5 customized motorcycles, ridden by imposing figures dressed in black leather, glided like predators toward the park. At their front, a silver serpent gleamed on the leader's bike tank, and its rider, a man with a familiar tattoo on his neck, smiled in a way that left no doubt about his intentions. The motorcycles began circling the park's perimeter in a calculated movement, like sharks surrounding their prey. Michael remained motionless, his body tense, but his mind clear, observing every movement of the bikers through the reflection in the water fountain. The leader, Snake, rode his modified Harley with predatory confidence, the snake tattoo on his neck seeming to come alive under the evening light. His companions followed his example, gradually reducing the circle around where Michael stood. Jordan, still distant but approaching, seemed oblivious to the situation unfolding. Michael could see his brother walking calmly, occasionally kicking small stones along the way, completely absorbed in his own world. The contrast between Jordan's innocence and the approaching threat made Michael's heart race. He knew he needed to stay calm, but every fiber of his being screamed to protect his younger brother from the imminent danger approaching. The first contact came through subtle provocations. "Hey, St. Patrick's schoolboy!" shouted one of the bikers, revealing they knew more about Michael than they should. The others laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the now almost empty park. Snake remained silent, just watching, his eyes fixed on Michael with disturbing intensity. The air seemed to get heavier with each second, charged with the electricity of a storm about to explode. The motorcycles continued their circular movement, but now closer, the rumble of engines creating a threatening symphony that seemed to swallow all other sounds in the park. Michael noticed disturbing details: chains hanging from belts, tattoos that told stories of violence, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Each turn the motorcycles made seemed to tighten the siege even more, like an invisible rope closing around him. The sun, now lower on the horizon, cast elongated shadows that seemed to dance to the rhythm of that silent threat. Snake finally stopped his motorcycle, turning off the engine with a deliberate movement that made the following silence seem deafening. His companions followed his example, creating a perfect semicircle in front of Michael. The leader dismounted his bike with feline grace, removing his leather gloves finger by finger, while his eyes never left Michael's face. It was at that moment that Jordan finally noticed something wrong, stopping abruptly a few meters away. Time seemed to freeze at that instant, as if the universe itself held its breath, waiting for what was to come. Snake stepped forward, a cruel smile forming on his lips, and the words that came out of his mouth carried a promise of violence that made the air around even denser. "Let's see what you've got in your pockets, kid." Snake advanced with calculated steps toward Michael, his eyes fixed like those of a predator. The gang leader was even more intimidating up close, tall, muscular, with scars that told stories of past violence. His companions formed a human barrier, blocking any possible escape route. The air was charged with tension as Snake extended his hand, demanding Michael's backpack and cell phone. The distant sound of Jordan's frightened screams only served to intensify the gravity of the situation. In a quick movement, one of the bikers grabbed Michael's arm, intending to force him to hand over his belongings. It was at that moment that something changed in the teenager's gaze. The apparent submission gave way to a surprising calm, a tranquility that disconcerted even Snake. Time seemed to slow down as Michael, with surgical precision, executed a sequence of movements that no one expected to see from a 16-year-old boy. In a matter of seconds, the first aggressor was on the ground, moaning and holding his wrist. The crowd that was beginning to form watched in shock as 2 other gang members advanced simultaneously. Michael moved like water, flowing between attacks with a lethal grace that only years of training could provide. His strikes were precise and efficient, each movement calibrated to neutralize without causing permanent damage. The years of dedication to Krav Maga, manifested in every block, in every counterattack, transforming what should have been simple intimidation into an impressive demonstration of self-defense. Phones were already raised, filming every moment of the unexpected confrontation. Snake's expression transformed from arrogant confidence to growing rage as he watched 3 of his men fall. The gang leader observed with barely contained fury as his companions, who used to intimidate so easily, were systematically defeated by someone they considered easy prey. The impromptu audience murmured in admiration, some even applauding when Michael finished the 3rd aggressor with a particularly impressive technique. The setting sun cast an orange glow over the scene, creating dramatic shadows that seemed to dance around the combatants. Snake, his face contorted in a mask of hatred and humiliation, backed up a few steps toward his motorcycle. For a moment, it seemed the confrontation had ended, that Michael's demonstration of skill had been enough to end the conflict. But then, with a sudden movement that made the crowd hold its breath, Snake reached for something in his leather jacket. The metallic gleam of a heavy chain glinted in the evening air, and the smile that formed on the gang leader's face promised that the real battle was just beginning. The chain cut through the air with a deadly hiss, spinning in Snake's experienced hand like an extension of his own body. The crowd instinctively backed away, forming a wider circle around the combatants. Michael maintained his defensive posture, his eyes focused not on the chain, but on the subtle movements of Snake's shoulders and hips, knowing that there he would find the true indications of the next attack. The air was electrically charged, each breath seeming to echo in the tense silence that had formed. Snake attacked with explosive fury, the chain hissing in a deadly arc aimed at Michael's head. The movement was precise and cruel, born of years of street violence. But where Snake had experience in brutality, Michael had discipline and training. With a calmness that seemed supernatural for a teenager his age, he waited until the last possible second before moving. The chain passed centimeters from his face, and in that moment of vulnerability from the attacker, Michael counterattacked with a precise kick that hit Snake's wrist. The metallic sound of the chain hitting the ground was amplified by the crowd's silence. Snake staggered backward, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. The snake tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse with his labored breathing as he processed the fact that his favorite weapon had been neutralized so easily. The other gang members, those who could still stand, watched in astonishment as their invincible leader was challenged by a simple student. Michael maintained his high guard, aware that Snake, like any wounded predator, would be more dangerous than ever. The gang leader cast a quick glance at his fallen companions, at the crowd with their raised phones, and finally at Michael, who remained unshakable. The public humiliation was complete, and everyone present knew it. The myth of invincibility that Snake had built over the years lay shattered at his feet, along with his chain. It was at this moment that sirens began to sound in the distance, their growing wail cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. Snake cast one last hate-filled look toward Michael, his words cutting like poison. "This isn't over, kid. You have no idea what you started today." With quick and coordinated movements, the gang mounted their bikes, the engines roaring in a final show of defiance. As they disappeared into the city streets, leaving only the echo of their threats, Michael finally allowed his shoulders to relax. The sun had almost disappeared on the horizon, but the phone lights continued to shine, capturing the final moments of what would be remembered as the afternoon when an ordinary student challenged the neighborhood's terror. However, as the adrenaline began to subside, a new sensation took over Michael. The awareness that the consequences of this confrontation would echo far beyond that moment. As the roar of the motorcycles disappeared into the distance, reality began to materialize around Michael like a gradual wave. The crowd's murmurs grew in volume, smartphones still pointed in his direction, capturing every movement. Jordan ran toward him, his eyes wide, oscillating between admiration and fear. The younger brother practically threw himself into his arms, and Michael felt the tremor in the boy's body, a sharp reminder of the real danger he had just faced. Around them, the crowd began to approach, with a mixture of curiosity and newly discovered respect. Fragments of conversations floated in the air. "Did you see those moves?" It's the kid from St. Patrick's. Has anyone posted the video yet? Michael could feel the exact moment when his ordinary life began to transform into something different, something more public than he had ever desired. Videos of the confrontation were already being shared in local groups, involuntarily transforming him into a kind of neighborhood hero. Some people approached to congratulate him, others to check if he was okay. An elderly man who usually played chess in the park commented that he had witnessed several acts of intimidation by Snake's gang, but had never seen anyone face them in that way. Michael kept Jordan close while politely answering questions, but his mind was already calculating the repercussions of what had just happened. He knew that Snake's threats weren't empty. There were stories about what happened to those who challenged his authority. The sound of sirens was closer now, and Michael knew he would have to explain everything to the authorities. His cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating with notifications. Friends and acquaintances had already seen the videos spreading rapidly through social media. A quick glance at the messages showed that his mother was also trying to contact him, probably alerted by some acquaintance who recognized her sons in the viral videos. The quiet afternoon in the park had transformed into something much bigger than he could have imagined. The first police cars arrived at the scene, their blue and red lights painting dancing shadows on the faces of the spectators still present. As officers began to disperse the crowd and approached to collect statements, Michael felt a subtle change in the air, as if the universe had turned an important page in his story. But as he watched the police approach, an unsettling sensation began to grow in his chest. The knowledge that somewhere in the city, Snake was planning his revenge, and this confrontation was far, very far from being over. The walk home never seemed so long. Michael and Jordan walked side by side after giving their statement to the police, their shadows stretching under the light of the street lamps that were beginning to turn on. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, unasked questions. Jordan occasionally cast admiring glances at his older brother, as if seeing him for the first time. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the almost empty sidewalks, while the first stars began to dot the night sky. The front door opened before they even reached the porch. Their mother, Sarah, was standing in the entrance, her face a mixture of concern and relief. She had left the veterinary clinic early after seeing videos of the confrontation circulating in local neighborhood groups. Her eyes examined every inch of her sons, looking for injuries, while pulling them inside into a tight embrace. The familiar smell of her soft perfume mixed with hospital antiseptic brought a sense of safety that made Michael realize how tense he had been. In the kitchen, while Sarah applied ice to Michael's scratches and prepared hot chocolate to calm their nerves, the questions began to flow. Jordan, now more relaxed, narrated the events with growing enthusiasm, his eyes shining as he described how his brother had faced the aggressors. Michael watched his mother's expression oscillate between pride and concern with each new detail revealed. The steam rising from the hot chocolate cups created soft patterns in the air, while the family processed the events of that extraordinary afternoon. It was during this moment of calm that Michael finally found the words to explain to Jordan what had really happened. It wasn't about strikes or fighting techniques, he explained, but about having the courage to face fear with dignity. As he spoke, Michael realized his words weren't just for his brother. They were a reminder to himself about why he had started training Krav Maga in the first place. It wasn't to hurt or intimidate, but to protect those he loved and stand firm in the face of injustice. The next morning dawned with a different energy hovering over the neighborhood. Michael woke up to the sound of his cell phone vibrating incessantly, dozens of notifications from people sharing and commenting on the videos of the confrontation. Among the messages, there was one that particularly caught his attention. It was from his Krav Maga instructor, Sensei Chen, asking to talk before that afternoon's training. The mentor who had guided him through the last few years would certainly have much to say about the previous day's events. At school, the corridors would fall silent when Michael passed, only to explode in whispers right after. Some younger students looked at him with barely disguised admiration, while others seemed to finally find the courage to share their own stories of encounters with Snake's gang. During the break, a group of freshmen approached timidly, asking about Krav Maga classes. Michael realized that his involuntary action had triggered something bigger, a wave of people seeking ways to strengthen themselves, to no longer be victims. In the afternoon, at the gym where he trained, Sensei Chen received him with an enigmatic smile. The conversation that followed was deep and revealing. The master wasn't interested in the technical details of the confrontation, but rather in the impact that moment would have on the community. True strength, Chen explained, isn't in the strikes you deliver, but in the people you inspire to rise up. As they talked, more students began arriving for class, many of them new faces, all inspired by the previous day's events. The following weeks brought significant changes to the neighborhood. Police increased their patrols, and reports of intimidation decreased considerably. Snake and his gang seemed to have disappeared, although Michael maintained constant vigilance, especially during walks with Jordan. The most impressive thing, however, was seeing how his action had catalyzed a transformation in the community. Young people who used to walk with their heads down now walked with more confidence, and Sensei Chen's gym had a waiting list for the first time in years. On a quiet night, sitting on the house porch observing the street movement, Michael reflected on how a single moment of courage could trigger so many changes. Jordan joined him, now also a beginner in Krav Maga classes, and together they shared a moment of understanding silence. The fear of possible retaliation from Snake still existed, but it had been transformed into something different, a deeper understanding that true strength wasn't in the ability to win fights, but in the courage to face fear and inspire others to do the same. The stars shone in the night sky while the brothers contemplated how that afternoon in the park had changed not only their lives, but the entire dynamics of their community, proving that sometimes the most courageous act is simply standing firm in the face of adversity.